Serial killers have both haunted and fascinated people for centuries, but Lonnie David Franklin Jr. fell more in the haunting category. In 1985, this man claimed his first victim, Sharon Alice Dismuke. Then, his murder spree extended from 1984 all the way to 2007, taking a page out of Jack the Ripper's book. Most of Lonnie's victims were sex workers, and almost all of them were black women. Apparently, Lonnie David Franklin Jr. was a member of the United States Army, but unsurprisingly, he was dishonorably discharged for gang raping a 17-year-old, meaning his terror extended long before he started murdering people. Even though Franklin was attributed to 17 murders, he eluded the police until the 2000s, when his son's DNA was coincidentally matched to the crimes. But since he would have been too young at the time, the police used an undercover agent to out Lonnie, using a slice of pizza. In July 2010, Lonnie was finally arrested and put on trial for 10 murders and 1 attempted murder, with bail being out of the question.
Why did all of this happen? Why did you do all of these things? All of these women were defenseless. They were not a threat to you in any way, shape, or form.
Dubbed the Grim Sleeper, Lonnie was sentenced to death.
But it's not vengeance. It's justice, Mr. Franklin. It is the judgment and sentence of this court that you shall suffer the death penalty.
But his fate would be strangely rushed when he was found dead in his prison cell. While Lonnie escaped for a while, George Brinkmann definitely did not. Ohio suffered 5 horrific serial killings in 2017 at the hands of this man, George Brinkmann. It started in North Royalton, where Brinkmann held Suzanne Taylor and her 2 daughters captive before brutally murdering them with various tools, like a knife, a pillow, and a phone cord. After fleeing to another house, he shot 2 more people, Roberta and Regal Johns, then made his way to a 3rd house, thinking he would get away. He was gravely mistaken when SWAT showed up to arrest him in a 9-hour standoff that ended with Brinkmann subduing with a stun gun. In court, Brinkmann confessed to the murders, but had the nerve to plead for mercy, despite giving none to his victims. Nothing was more heartbreaking than Suzanne Taylor's partner, though, who gave a tear-jerking impact statement.
The reality is that George Brinkmann Jr. took from all 3 of them the very right to breathe when he carried out his plan last June. When he brutally murdered Taylor, Kylie, and Suzanne, when he bound them, murdering them one by one, he didn't show any mercy. Yet, he has the audacity to ask this court, you, for mercy on him.
Thankfully, he could rest a little easier knowing Brinkmann received the death penalty and is on death row till 2026.
We do hereby impose the death penalty in count 1, count 3, and count 5 for those aggravated murders.
While some murders were committed decades ago, everyone eventually gets caught, like Brian Patrick Miller. In the early 1990s, Phoenix, Arizona became a horror region for cyclists when 2 women, Angela Brousseau and Melanie Burness, were murdered 10 months apart by Brian Patrick Miller. One body was found decapitated near the bike trail, while the other was found floating in a canal. It would take around 2 decades for the murderer to get his penance, though, when Brian Miller was arrested in 2015 after some DNA advancements. 20 years must have taken a toll on Miller, because he was almost unfit to stand trial. Not that he was in the right headspace in the 90s to begin with. After going for the insanity plea, the defense tried their best to avoid the death penalty, and no matter how many times his attorney would try to comfort him, the judge simply would not give in.
The question the court must answer is if the totality of the mitigation is sufficiently substantial to call for leniency. The answer is no.
Ironically, Miller used to dub himself the Zombie Hunter. Now he'll share one thing with zombies, which is death, because Miller was given the death penalty. While most serial killers have some sort of motivation or pattern, some are just pure chaos, like Earl Donaldson. Earl Donaldson terrorized Tampa, Florida between October and November 2017 when he brutally shot and killed 4 completely random strangers in less than a month. His victims, Benjamin Mitchell, Monica Hoffa, Anthony Neboa, and Ronald Felton, had no connection to each other or to Donaldson, who worked at McDonald's. Everyone loves McDonald's, and fittingly, it would be the last place he would ever see as a free man, because he was arrested there on the same day he was trying to quit after giving his boss a bag with a gun to bury. Donaldson's trial was a major event for Florida's citizens, who could finally sleep with both eyes open, and the victims' families made the trial much more intense.
My heart is broken. I pray that you spend the rest of your life thinking about the reason you chose to be the beast, the murdering monster you are.
And you took my daughter's life. I'll never understand that.
An unexpected twist was that Donaldson possibly suffered from a mental illness, and his parents knowing about the condition and simply leaving him this way. However, this theory wouldn't stick, as Donaldson was given 4 consecutive life sentences after finally admitting to the murders in 2023.
Each of those charges that I've just described, how do you plead today?
Guilty.
But how far could you go to make a serial killer cry? Gary Ridgway would know. Gary Ridgway was the notorious Green River Killer between 1982 and 1988, with a kill count among the highest ever for a serial killer. While Ridgway confessed to the killings of 48 women, he may have murdered a mind-boggling 71. Like Jack the Ripper and Lonnie David Franklin Jr., many of his victims were sex workers. Ridgway was arrested the same way most serial killers eventually fall, through DNA evidence. What was truly harrowing was Ridgway's admission that he had killed so many women, including his own wife, that he'd lost count.
It's like he didn't have any remorse at all for what he had done. You know, he'd killed so many people, he didn't remember who they were, what they looked like. I just couldn't believe that somebody could kill all those people and not remember them.
After admitting to the 48 murders,
Mr. Ridgway, how do you plead to the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree, as charged in count 1 for the death of Wendy Lee Caulfield?
Guilty.
How do you plead to the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree, as charged in count 2?
Guilty. Guilty. Guilty.
Ridgway was sentenced to 48 consecutive life sentences.
I wish for him to have a long, suffering, cruel death.
But prison was no better at breaking him than the words of a kind old father of one of the victims in court.
There are people here that hate you. I'm not one of them. You've made it difficult to live up to what I believe, and it is what God says to do, and that's to forgive. You are forgiven, sir.
The father's words reduced the hardened serial killer to tears, a sight to truly behold. More often than not, though, serial killers have serious issues that could make them unfit to even stand trial, like Carlos Dominguez. In April of 2023, Davis, California, also became a terror town when 2 people were murdered and 1 barely survived in 1 month. First, it was a kind local homeless man by the name of David Brew, who was brutally stabbed. Then it was an undergraduate student, Karim Abou-Najam, also fatally stabbed. Lastly, Kimberly Gilroy had some luck when she survived the 3rd stabbing assault in a tent, but remained in critical condition. Coincidentally, Carlos Dominguez was stopped by police one day when fate would have it that his bag included a hunting knife, very similar to the murder weapon of the 3 victims. After his arrest, a massive debate sparked concerning his ability to be fit to stand trial. While some had sympathy,
I feel tremendously sorry for that kid who was thrown into a foreign country with no family and no way of ever ending up being a normal human being.
Others were adamant that he could stand trial, and they must have been right, because Dominguez gave a confession right then and there in court.
I want to apologize, and I want to say I'm guilty and forgive me.
Despite his confession, though, the case remains open as of July 2023. Nobody on this list, or even in history, has managed to elude the police as long as Joseph DAngelo has. It's crazy to think that this feeble, wheelchair-bound old man was one of America's most brutal wanted murderers. 2018 witnessed perhaps the biggest serial killer arrest in history when the Golden State Killer, aka Joseph DAngelo, was finally caught and taken down. The Golden State Killer, aka the Night Stalker, is a notorious serial killer that terrorized California in the 1970s. The Golden State Killer is said to have murdered 13 victims and raped more than 50. Unfortunately, though, like Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac, the Golden State Killer's case went cold, and everyone thought he had won. Until 2016, when the case was reopened, and 2 years later, with a DNA breakthrough, the then 73-year-old Joseph DAngelo was arrested and revealed as the Golden State Killer. DAngelo's trials became a worldwide event, as he confessed to 13 counts of first-degree murder and 13 counts of kidnapping.
I know whatever words I say today will pale in comparison to the words the survivors have spoken. They need to be said. The fundamental principle of law, that justice delayed is justice denied, is no truer than in this case.
However, due to California's statute of limitations, he couldn't be tried for the rape charges from the 70s. In court, decades after what had happened to them, DAngelo's victims still came forward to discuss the trauma he had left them with 40 years prior.
I was hit several times on the head before being tied up, gagged, and blindfolded. We were both threatened, and I was raped multiple times.
As a masked man, DAngelo, yielding a knife, told me he would kill me if I didn't do what he demanded. He raped me, repeatedly.
My mother told me that day when he was caught, she was going to look him into the eyes and testify to what he had done to her, to my father, and to our family.
DAngelo's wheelchair look is theorized to be a complete facade, given his strong and intense statement where he seemed as terrifying as ever.
I've listened to all your statements, each one of them. And I'm really sorry for everyone I've hurt. Thank you, Your Honor.
After years and $20 million in taxpayers' money, DAngelo was sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 8 more years. It's safe to say he will never see the light of day on the outside again, and perhaps he may continue his sentence beyond death.